Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere soft, strange and squirmy. You're standing in the middle of a drafty medieval hallway, flickering torchlight bouncing off stone walls, and there's an oddly warm, wriggling sensation crawling up your left forearm. It's not a ghost, not a spider, it's a ferret. Yes, your ferret. Her name is Millicent, and she's comfortably nestled in the oversized sleeve of your embroidered gown, occasionally poking her pointy nose out for a sniff of the damp air or to hiss at a passing servant. You probably won't survive this era, let's be honest. Between the inconsistent plumbing, the wild fashion expectations, and the very real risk of being burned as a witch for harboring a weasel under your hem, your odds are not spectacular. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You brush a gloved hand down the length of your gown, smoothing the brocade over your hip. The dress is lovely, though heavy enough to collapse a small table, and it's just the kind of garment that suggests a person with either a lot of money or a lot of rats. Your sleeve twitches. Millicent has shifted again. She's burrowing down near your elbow, content, and probably plotting to steal someone's poultry later. You'd be surprised how common this was. In the 13th to 15th centuries, especially among the upper classes of England, France, and parts of Italy, women routinely kept small mammals in their sleeves, mostly ferrets, sometimes polecats, occasionally something that looked like a stoat but probably had aspirations of becoming a cat. These weren't just pets, though. They were working animals, valued for their sleek bodies, their hunting instinct, and their willingness to crawl into tight, dark places to chase rats, mice, or anything else that made life unpleasant. Rats, after all, were not optional in the Middle Ages. They were everywhere, under floorboards, in the rafters, nesting behind sacred tapestries and inside very expensive boots. If you've ever tried to keep food unspoiled in a manor house with no refrigeration and a kitchen staff trained mostly in spiritual guilt, you'll understand the need for biological pest control. Enter the sleeve ferret. Fast, flexible, and fiercely loyal, especially when bribed with scraps of duck. They slithered through the tunnels of your clothing with the same ease they moved through pantries and storerooms. They weren't just tolerated, they were expected. Even fashion evolved to accommodate them. You glance down at your sleeve again. It's enormous, longer than your arm, with a pointed cuff that dangles somewhere between decorative and ridiculous. But it's also warm and useful and alive. Fashion historians still argue whether the trend began as a deliberate aesthetic choice, or whether the sleeves simply got big because aristocrats ran out of ways to spend money vertically and had to start thinking horizontally. But once those sleeves existed, it didn't take long for women, who were often confined indoors with little agency and a lot of embroidery, to think, this seems like a good place for a ferret. And so it became a thing. Lady Marjorie might not be allowed to own property or speak at court without permission, but she could absolutely teach her pet Mustela putorius furo to sneak cheese from the bishop's table without knocking over the salt. It was, in many ways, the perfect rebellion. You walk slowly now, down a stone hallway, past tapestries depicting dragons, saints, and at least one suspiciously smug goat. Your footsteps echo slightly. Millicent is still. A servant bows as you pass, careful not to make eye contact with the sleeve. He's learned. Not everyone approved of ferrets in fine company. There were rumors, of course there were, that the animals were unclean, demonic, or carried dark energy. Medieval superstition being what it was, anything long and low to the ground with shiny eyes was at risk of being accused of spiritual mischief. Some even believed ferrets whispered secrets to witches. You'd be flattered, honestly, if your ferret whispered anything beyond "more meat, please." But whisper she does. she chitters suddenly in your ear, a tiny burst of nonsense syllables that makes the visiting Hungarian ambassador nearly choke on his mead. You hide your smile behind a goblet. Millicent, it seems, is doing her job. Historians still argue whether noblewomen genuinely loved their sleeve ferrets, or if the practice was more performative. Another status symbol in a world that already used exotic birds, impractical headwear, and disturbingly tall shoes to say, I am richer than you, and also have a terrible sense of balance. But there are enough records, letters, paintings, even a few surprisingly poetic wills, to suggest that yes, these creatures were beloved, quirky, occasionally stinky, but beloved. Tonight, Millicent sleeps curled around your wrist like a fuzzy bracelet. You stroke her gently. Tomorrow, she'll chase something unpleasant out of the pantry or startle a page boy into dropping his tray of pheasant legs. But for now, all is calm. The fire crackles softly in the great hall. The banners hang still. Somewhere upstairs, someone is tuning a lute. And on your lap, your sleeve wiggles slightly as your tiny companion dreams of tunnels, toast crumbs, and maybe that smug goat from the tapestry. You wake to the sound of tiny nails scratching faintly beneath linen. Millicent is already up. Of course she is. And you can feel her cold little nose pressing just above your wrist as if to say, Where's breakfast, peasant? She's not wrong to ask. The fire in the hearth has died down. Your chamber is cold, and somewhere downstairs someone is overcooking oats again. You stretch, groan softly, and slide out of bed, careful not to jostle your living armpit ornament. She adjusts herself with a tiny yawn, turns around twice, and settles back down like she owns the joint, which, in many ways, she does. Because in the early 14th century, ferrets aren't just fuzzy accessories. They're status symbols. You toss on your outer gown, thick wool, blue-dyed, heavy with embroidery that you've mostly stopped admiring because it catches on doorknobs, and slip your arm back into your sleeve. Millicent climbs inside without a fuss, like a sleepy roommate who always gets shotgun. Her little claws anchor into the seam for stability. As you descend the stairs, you pass your cousin, Lady Joan, whose sleeves are even longer than yours. She carries a lapdog in one and a marten in the other. The dog yaps, the marten hisses. The two creatures are clearly locked in a centuries-long feud that will not be resolved before breakfast. You nod politely. The marten snarls. You win. Down in the great hall, the morning light streams in through stained glass, splashing the stone floor with jewel-toned warmth. Servants move quietly, carrying jugs of ale and bread baskets. At the long table, a few other noblewomen lounge in various states of half-awake grace, all of them cradling some kind of weasel or fuzzling in their sleeves. One woman feeds her ferret scraps of cold sausage, carefully threading the morsels into the opening of her cuff like she's posting a letter. It's a slow morning, no war, no weddings, just a casual gathering of high-born women and their sleepy meat tubes. You sit. Millicent pokes her head out, sniffs the table, and steals a berry from your bowl with the speed and precision of a pickpocket. You make no attempt to stop her. After all, you brought her here to be useful. Ferrets, by this point in medieval Europe, have a long-standing reputation as skilled hunters of small, inconvenient creatures. Their slim, flexible bodies are perfect for diving into rabbit warrens and rat tunnels. Falconers used them. Farmers cherished them. Even knights brought them along on campaign, not for company, but for sanitation. Still, not everyone appreciates their talents. Your aunt, stern, lavender-scented, with sleeves more like sausages than sanctuaries, clears her throat and raises an eyebrow. Still wearing that thing? You smile sweetly. Millicent, you say, is a lady of the court. Millicent chooses that moment to sneeze dramatically into your lap. Perfect timing. Historians still argue whether ferret keeping was truly common across the nobility or mostly confined to a handful of eccentric households, but enough accounts survive to prove they weren't just a passing whim. There's a record from 1322 of a Flemish merchant's wife who carried her ferret like a ring upon her arm beneath fine cloth. Another from the court of Provence mentions a lady-in-waiting who kept hers in a velvet-lined basket tied to her belt. And in England, artwork and marginalia occasionally depict women with long sleeves, tiny snouts peeking out, as if ferrets were just another part of their outfit. You finish your breakfast. Millicent has now claimed the crust of your bread and is attempting to wedge it back inside the sleeve for safekeeping. You sigh and let her. Later, you walk through the herb garden. Your dress trails across the dirt path, catching rosemary and mint as you pass. Millicent emerges briefly for a sun bath on your wrist, stretching in the sunlight like a sock with dreams. She flops dramatically, then disappears back into the wool. There's something comforting about her presence, not just because she's cute and vaguely ridiculous, but because she gives your idle days a rhythm, a purpose. You're not a warrior, you're not a scholar, you're certainly not going to inherit anything beyond your cousin's weird spoon collection. But you are a keeper of ferrets. That counts for something, even in this quiet little corner of the kingdom, where the biggest excitement last month was when someone's goat broke into the chapel and chewed a psalter. As you pause beside the well, you notice a mouse dart across the stone rim. Millicent notices too. She wriggles forward, half out of your sleeve now, her eyes locked on the tiny target. You give her a nod. She launches herself like a furry missile. 3 seconds later, no more mouse. You scoop her up, brush the dust from her coat, and tuck her gently back into her fleece-lined corridor of a sleeve. There's blood on her whiskers, but she's purring. If medieval women weren't allowed to hunt or own land or attend universities, at least they could dominate the rodent population. And look elegant doing it. Your arm is warm, slightly itchy, and vaguely buzzing with life. That's what happens when you've been walking through damp castle corridors with a ferret stuffed into your sleeve for the better part of an hour. Millicent has grown restless. You can feel her coiling herself like a tiny, hairy spring, just waiting for something to pounce on, sniff at, or steal. You stop by the storage room door. It's oak, heavy, smells like old onions and medieval effort. You nudge it open. Inside, barrels, dried herbs, baskets of turnips, and a suspicious skittering sound that no one wants to take responsibility for. A perfect playground for your long, bendy pest assassin. You crouch low, point to the shadows near the far crate, and whisper, "Go." Millicent slips out like a trained noodle and vanishes under a crate with a soft plip sound. This, more than anything, is why ferrets became medieval legends. Not for their cuddliness, though, when sleepy and full of cheese, they're basically velvet sausages, but for their agility and instincts. A good ferret could clear an entire granary of vermin in a night, diving into gaps too small for a hand and too narrow for a broom. You hear a squeak, then silence, then a triumphant sneeze. Millicent emerges, tail high, carrying something grey and defeated. She drops it at your feet, blinks once, and then climbs halfway up your skirt, demanding either praise or poultry. You comply with both. Historians still argue whether medieval households relied more on cats, dogs, or ferrets for pest control. Cats had the advantage of self-sufficiency. Dogs had strength, but ferrets had something unique, shape. A ferret's long body and flexible spine made it ideal for slinking into walls, under floorboards, or into the structural mysteries of poorly constructed castles. And unlike cats, they didn't try to make you feel bad about feeding them leftovers. You tuck Millicent back into your sleeve, where she resumes her semi-permanent status as a living heating pad. You make your way back through the hall, trailing the faint smell of dust, old cheese, and ferret triumph. A group of ladies huddles near the fireplace, sipping warmed ale and gossiping in hushed tones. "She let it sleep in her wedding dress," one of them whispers, scandalized. "That's nothing," another adds. "Lady Bethany's bit a scribe." The group erupts into muffled giggles. You smile. You know Lady Bethany, and her ferret, named Sir Buttons. He's fierce. He's moody. He once shredded a bishop's glove, and no one's been allowed to forget it. In truth, the popularity of ferrets among noblewomen wasn't always accepted without a raised eyebrow. Some clergy viewed the practice as unseemly, too close to indulgence, too vain, too much like turning a household servant into a pet and then letting it nap on your dinnerware. Others simply feared the creatures. With their bright eyes, slinky bodies, and sudden movements, ferrets were occasionally lumped into the same nervous categories as foxes, snakes, and unmarried women over 30. It didn't help that they sometimes popped out of sleeves unannounced during religious ceremonies. You once saw a priest drop an entire chalice when someone's ferret leapt onto the altar in pursuit of a moth. The creature was unharmed. The priest's ego was not. You take a turn through the outer courtyard now. The sun is shining, a rare treat. Millicent pokes her head out and sniffs the breeze, sneezes twice, and then hides again. The air is cool, but not unfriendly. The kind of weather that makes you wonder if spring might consider showing up early just this once. A young page races past you, carrying a bundle of firewood. He stumbles slightly when Millicent's eyes catch his. He mutters something about witches and rushes off. You consider correcting him, but decide against it. Let him wander. You stroll past the stables, where someone has been talking loudly about their cousin's new cat. You can tell by the tone that it's a competitive pet situation, but ferrets don't need to compete. They just show up, solve your rat problem, and fall asleep in your sock drawer. Cats can't do that. Well, some cats. But not without knocking over 3 candlesticks and a sacred text. You step into the shadow of the tower. A breeze catches your sleeve, and Millicent fluffs slightly, rearranging herself with a disapproving grunt. She prefers steady temperatures. You scratch her under the chin, and she settles again. This is your routine, yours and hers. And while the world outside still spins with tournaments and politics and the occasional peasant uprising, in your corner of the castle, it's just you, your velvet tunnel of a sleeve, and a creature with more attitude than sense. Historians still debate whether sleeve ferrets were ever common or just famously weird, but enough portraits, records, and offhand mentions remain to suggest this wasn't a one-off trend. It was a thing. It was life. And in a world where so much of your time is dictated by the whims of other people, lords, husbands, priests, it's oddly empowering to have something fuzzy curled up in your gown that listens to you, or at least steals your bread on command. You turn and head back inside. There are rumours of honey tarts being served with supper. Millicent will want one. You're not imagining it. Your sleeves are getting longer, and not just because of fashion, although that certainly plays a part. No, your sleeves are growing wider, deeper, more tunnel-like because your ferret keeps getting ideas, like hiding snacks in there, or stashing shiny objects, or once, an entire baby frog. You didn't discover the frog until it hopped out onto the table during morning prayers. It croaked during the Lord's Prayer. Everyone looked at the bishop. He did not take it well. You glance at your sleeve now. Millicent is snuggled inside, snoozing in the fabric folds like a sausage in a bread roll. Her tiny chest rises and falls with soft, snuffly little sounds, and you swear you can feel crumbs shifting around under there like buried treasure. Of course, medieval clothing was already heading in the direction of the dramatic. The Gothic era loved a statement silhouette, especially for those wealthy enough to afford a tailor with access to imported fabrics, embroidery threads, and a wildly unregulated imagination. So, while your average peasant was trudging around in wool sacks and practical shoes, noblewomen were out here inventing walking wardrobes with sleeves big enough to accidentally lose your lunch in. Literally, You once dropped a plum tart into your left arm and didn't find it for 4 hours. Millicent was thrilled, but historians still argue whether the oversized sleeves evolved because of the ferret trend, or whether the sleeves came first and someone eventually thought, you know what this needs? A small, highly mobile meatworm with teeth. You suspect it's a bit of both, and either way, it's functional fashion. Your gown today is made of dark green velvet, trimmed with gold thread, and smells vaguely of rosemary, mothballs, and wet weasel. The sleeves hang almost to your knees when your arms are down, and they swing with enough weight to knock over a candlestick if you're not paying attention. You've done that twice this week. Fortunately, Millicent is surprisingly fire-aware. You're walking through the castle's winter gallery now, a drafty stretch of stone hall lined with stained glass and unpopular relatives' portraits. Millicent pokes her head out of your cuff like a sleepy periscope. She sneezes once, ducks back in, and repositions herself next to your elbow. That's her favourite spot. Warm, quiet, safe, and just far enough from your wrist that she can ignore any social obligation you impose on her. The gallery ends in a reading room, or rather, the idea of a reading room. There are a few chairs, a table, a half-empty bookshelf, and 2 half-asleep ladies staring into the middle distance, each with a furry passenger somewhere in their garments. One of them lifts her arm to reveal a white ferret with pink eyes and what can only be described as resting royal face. They get longer every year, she mutters, referring to the sleeves, though the ferret flicks its tail in agreement anyway. Yours, too. Last month, your cousin commissioned a gown with sleeves that trailed behind her like fabric comets. She tripped down 4 stairs and took 2 footmen with her. Everyone agreed it was very dignified. Even your tailor is getting in on it. He recently suggested adding pockets to the sleeves, padded little nests lined with fur designed for maximum ferret luxury. You're considering it. But for now, Millicent seems content with the traditional tunnel. And truthfully, you are too. There's something oddly peaceful about walking through the castle with a living creature asleep against your forearm, like carrying a secret, or a very judgmental hot water bottle. You sit by the window. It's foggy today, and you can just make out the outlines of trees, the distant movement of geese, and the slightly louder than necessary shouting of someone trying to fix the roof. Millicent stirs, sensing the chill. You tuck your sleeve higher around her. You're not the only one doing this, of course. All across the region, women of certain status are adopting their own furry companions. Some name them after saints, others after long-dead husbands. One woman in Flanders reportedly named her ferret Guilt. We can only assume she had reasons. Still, the trend continues. It's not just about utility anymore, it's about comfort, about identity, and yes, about fashion. Because when your sleeves are large enough to contain a living creature, your silhouette changes, your posture shifts, you move differently, carefully, like you're always just a little bit pregnant with chaos. It becomes part of you. There's even a new dance circulating the court that includes a sleeve shake, ostensibly to show off embroidery, but clearly designed to make your ferret dramatically reappear like a furry magician's assistant. You haven't learned the steps. Millicent isn't much for choreography, but the message is clear. These sleeves are more than just cloth. They're homes, tiny habitats, portable stages, and they let you, a woman in a world not exactly built for you, carry something small and fierce right under the noses of everyone who thinks you're just here to look pretty and marry well. You smile. Millicent burps gently. It's late afternoon, and the sun's doing that thing where it pretends to be helpful, casting golden slivers across the floor. But really, it's just making the dust look judgmental. You're sitting near the chapel, an admittedly odd place to rest, given that Millicent tends to get vocal when she hears organ music, but it's quiet, and the air smells of beeswax, lavender, and old incense. Your sleeves, as usual, are full. Millicent has curled up again, tucked neatly near your wrist, her fur blending in with the folds of your brocade like some medieval camouflage. You can feel her body gently vibrating as she snores, a tiny engine of warmth and whiskers. And yet, not everyone approves. Over the weeks, you've become aware of the looks. The side eyes from older women in tighter sleeves. The murmured Latin from clerics who mistake ferret chittering for the voice of Satan's plumber. One monk nearly dropped his psalter when Millicent yawned during morning mass. But it's more than shock or discomfort. It's suspicion, because not everyone trusts a woman who walks around with a slinky meat eel in her gown. Superstition runs deep in your time. Ferrets are quick, clever, hard to control, and famously tricky to exercise, which, to the medieval mind, makes them a bit too much like women. It doesn't help that some peasants think ferrets are unnatural, not quite cats, not quite rats, too many teeth, too little shame, and far too fond of ankles. You remember hearing a story as a child, something about a noblewoman who kept a ferret that whispered secrets from the devil directly into her ear. It supposedly advised her on gambling, embroidery, and how to poison her rivals with plum tarts. You were disappointed to learn it wasn't true. Millicent has never whispered anything more useful than "there's cheese in that drawer." Still, the association lingers. Historians still argue whether ferrets were widely seen as familiars, witches' companions, or if that was mostly later projection layered over earlier eccentricities. Some scholars insist they were just another tool in the domestic arsenal, like a butter churn or a knife. Others argue that the moment a woman carried a live predator in her sleeve, people started asking theological questions. The truth probably lives somewhere in between. You shift slightly, letting Millicent stretch her legs. She clambers out, slides down the front of your skirt with a dignified thump, and begins investigating the chapel floor. You let her. She darts under a pew, pauses dramatically in a shaft of light, like she's about to deliver a sermon, then vanishes beneath the altar with the grace of a tiny, blessed ghost. She's definitely chasing something. Possibly a mouse, possibly a rumour. The priest enters just in time to see the tip of her tail disappear behind the altar rail. He pretends not to notice. You nod politely. He mutters something about the Lord's mysterious creatures and hurries away. Ferrets occupy a strange space in medieval folklore. They're not noble like falcons or horses, not household protectors like dogs, and not mystical like unicorns or cats with perfect eyeliner. They're in between, misfits, useful, adorable, slightly chaotic misfits, and that makes them fascinating. You've heard of women being accused of using their ferrets to steal energy, or distract men, or eavesdrop on political meetings. One poem you read described a ferret as a serpent cloaked in fur, sent to test the patience of saints. That sounds about right. You rejoin Millicent near the altar and scoop her back into your sleeve. She huffs in protest, licks your hand, and begins reorganizing your arm to her liking. One of the choir boys stares at you like you're part fairy, part outlaw. You wink. Back in the corridor, you find Lady Cecily tending to her own sleeve dweller, a pale, shaggy creature named Thistle, who recently chewed through her hair ribbon and now sleeps in it like a victory flag. Cecily sighs. She bit the baker's son again. You nod solemnly. He probably deserved it. He did. He always does. That night at supper, the bishop's seat remains conspicuously empty. There's a rumour that someone's mischievous pet dropped a dead vole into his goblet last night, and he's praying about it in solitude. You don't confirm or deny anything. Millicent watches the roasted chicken like she's calculating something complicated. You feed her a sliver under the table. Sometimes the chaos is worth it, and sometimes it's the only control you really have. because medieval women aren't exactly brimming with autonomy. Your choices are limited, your freedoms conditional, your value measured by dowries, heirs, and how quietly you can smile through a dinner where someone mistakes your opinion for a joke. But with Millicent tucked beneath your sleeve, you have a secret ally. She bites the rude ones. She's not sorry. You're up early today. Well, earlier than usual, because Lady Agnes has summoned you for some sort of embroidery gathering, which, as everyone knows, is code for gossip with needles. The only problem, Millicent is fully awake, twitchy, and looking for a problem to solve, which means your sleeve is very much not a quiet place right now. She's doing laps, literal laps, from wrist to elbow, then down again, like a fuzzy little knight on patrol through velvet corridors. You try to gently nudge her into a more meditative state, but she's having none of it. She sneezes, spins, and finally sticks her head out from your cuff like she's demanding a view. You offer her a dried fig. She takes it, drops it, climbs back into the darkness. You sigh. It's going to be that kind of day. In the solar, the other ladies are already seated, surrounded by baskets of tangled thread and half-finished tapestries featuring heroic saints, virtuous queens, and, of course, unreasonably attractive angels. Lady Agnes greets you with a smile so polished it could butter bread. Darling, is your creature joining us today? You smile sweetly. Millicent sneezes on cue. Of course, she's quite talented with French knots. One of the younger girls giggles behind her hoop. You settle into your seat. The sunlight is pouring through the leaded glass, catching on the gold thread in your embroidery kit. Millicent pokes her nose out again, clearly unimpressed with your stitching progress. You whisper a promise of cheese later, and she settles into a tight, judgmental loaf. The conversation meanders from fashion to family alliances, to who's been seen speaking to whom in the garden after Compline. Every few minutes, someone's sleeve shifts unnaturally, and a snout appears to snag a bit of dropped thread, or investigate a particularly crinkly basket. It's like being in a covert weasel society, and you wouldn't have it any other way. Historians still argue whether these embroidery circles were genuinely places of artistic collaboration, or just medieval Facebook groups with less typing. Either way, they were spaces where women shared knowledge, news, and, apparently, rodent deterrents. Across from you, Lady Sybil's ferret, named Joffrey for reasons no one wants to question, manages to extract an entire biscuit from a sleeve and begin eating it in her lap. No one says a word. It's understood. Millicent, however, is now on high alert. She's caught the scent of someone else's food, and she does not believe in fairness. You feel her wiggle into position. She's planning a sortie. You gently press your arm against your side to keep her still. She lets out the smallest, most dramatic sigh. Back in your embroidery, your stitches are passable, though probably not museum quality. You're working on a floral border for a ceremonial pillow, which you suspect will end up under someone's footstool by next spring. Still, it's peaceful, mostly, except that Lady Agnes's cat has just wandered in. Now, medieval cats are not your modern, aloof loungers. They're wiry, twitchy, semi-feral creatures that glare at everyone like they're owed rent. This one's name is Marmalade, and Marmalade has seen things. He spots Millicent immediately. You feel her stiffen inside your sleeve like a tiny, tense spring. It's about to get dramatic. The cat crouches. Millicent emerges, slowly, like a creature sizing up an opponent across a poker table. Their eyes lock. You cough loudly and drop your embroidery hoop. Everyone jumps. Millicent retracts. Marmalade sulks under a chair. Peace is restored, for now. Later, as the session winds down, Lady Agnes begins talking about some sort of new sumptuary law. Something about banning certain dyes or sleeve shapes or perhaps pet ownership. The details are vague. The panic, however, is real. You glance around. Every woman in the room has at least one furry shape bulging gently beneath her gown. It's an unspoken rebellion. Millicent chooses that moment to belch, loudly. You cough again to hide your laughter. Historians still debate the extent to which women subverted the cultural rules imposed on them, but here's what you do know. If a law forbade extravagance, noble women would sew gold thread inside their sleeves where no one could see it. If a priest disapproved of pets, a lady might just teach hers to sit quietly through vespers. And if someone tried to outlaw ferrets, well, good luck, because how exactly do you enforce a ban on something that fits inside a sleeve? You stand to leave. Millicent clings gently to your forearm like a clingy sock with opinions. You nod politely to the room, then glide from the solar like nothing weird just happened. Your sleeve, as always, tells a different story. The castle smells like burnt onions today. Someone's overcooked the stew again, and the smoky tang has settled into every flagstone like a second-hand tunic. Millicent pokes her nose out of your sleeve, sniffs once, and immediately retreats, as if to say, absolutely not. You agree with her. Fortunately, you have other plans for the afternoon. You're heading to the herb garden, where the air is less flammable and the local mice population is bold enough to offer Millicent some light exercise. The path winds through an arched colonnade lined with ivy and pigeon droppings. You've walked it 100 times, but today it feels slower, softer. Your slippers scuff gently over the worn stones, and you keep your arms steady, ferret aboard. At the garden gate, you pause. The herbs are overgrown again, lavender spilling into the walkways, rosemary staging an uprising near the trellis, but it smells glorious, sharp and earthy and strangely clean in a world that's usually not. You pass under the willow tunnel, heading toward the mint patch. Millicent stirs again, alert. She remembers this place. It's where she caught her first vole. You praised her like she'd solved a murder. She sulked for 2 days after you gave it a proper burial instead of serving it with butter. You find your favorite bench near the thyme. It's cracked, slightly lopsided, and probably home to 3 different species of bug, but it gets the best light, and no one else comes here without a reason. Millicent climbs out slowly, sniffs the air, and disappears into the herbs like a long, judgmental ribbon. You breathe in deeply and stretch out your arms, enjoying the rare freedom of ferret-free sleeves. For once, the fabric doesn't rustle with movement. It just hangs, heavy and embroidered and faintly lemon-scented. You're alone, and that's rare. You glance around to make sure. No maids, no stewards, no priests asking nosy questions about rodent companions. Just birdsong, wind through leaves, and the occasional crunch of something unfortunate beneath Millicent's tiny, pitiless paws. Historians still argue whether noble women had truly private spaces in their daily lives. Certainly your chambers are visited often by servants, tutors, advisors, and that one elderly aunt who always just pops in when you're trying to nap. But gardens like this, they're liminal, too domestic for guards, too earthy for courtiers. They exist in a strange middle ground where expectations take a nap and sleeves don't have to perform. You sit there, half drowsing, half listening. A bee hums past. Somewhere to your left, Millicent hisses. You assume at a beetle. It's not personal. Everything annoys her before lunch. After a while, she returns, tail high, fur slightly damp, and eyes sparkling with victory. She crawls back into your sleeve, dragging a stick with her like a treasure. You pretend not to notice. It seems important. She dozes off immediately, belly warm against your arm, little paws twitching in dream chase mode. You stroke the outside of your sleeve gently, and this is what most people don't understand. It's not just about pest control. It's not about novelty or even fashion. It's about companionship. In a life full of arranged everything, marriages, meals, moods, it's nice to have something that chooses you, even if it occasionally steals your buttons. You remember when you first got her, a gift from your older cousin who claimed ferrets were all the rage in Burgundy and came wrapped in a cloak that smelled like cloves and regret. Millicent was barely longer than a spoon then, wide-eyed and twitchy, constantly biting things she shouldn't, like toes or small leather-bound Bibles. Now she's part of your rhythm. People talk about lapdogs, parlor parrots, and emotional support goats. Don't ask. But none of them curl around your wrist like living jewelry, breathe warm against your skin, and give you the side-eye when you sneeze. You stretch your legs. The sun is lower now, casting long, sleepy shadows across the stone wall. Somewhere in the kitchen wing, a pot clangs dramatically. You ignore it. It'll either be stew or porridge tonight. Probably both. Probably badly. Millicent stirs, adjusts her position with a series of muffled grunts, and settles again. You lean your head back and let the moment stretch. In a world that's always asking you to smile, to serve, to stitch and obey, there's something gloriously rebellious about letting your sleeve be a home, for mischief, for comfort, for something sharp-toothed and unapologetically alive. And if that happens to make the bishop uncomfortable, well, that's just a bonus. You wake to the unmistakable feeling of whiskers in your ear. Millicent has declared it morning. There is no room for negotiation. She wriggles out of your sleeve like a sleepy noodle and proceeds to march across your pillow with the purpose of a soldier and the grace of a spilled sock. One paw in your eye, another in your tea. A final sassy flick of the tail as she tumbles down the blanket and disappears beneath the bed. You blink against the light, already peeking through the wooden shutters. Somewhere in the castle, bells are tolling for prime, the start of the monastic day. You yawn, stretch and sit up, sleeves pooling around your elbows like twin fabric waterfalls. Your dressing gown is somewhere under the bed, so are your slippers. So is Millicent, now apparently wrestling something that squeaks. You hope it's a toy, but you're not optimistic. Today's schedule includes 3 embroidery commissions, a walk with Lady Cecily and her badly behaved ferret Joffrey, and, rumour has it, a visiting friar who doesn't believe women should own pets unless they lay eggs. You pull on your gown. It's heavy, embroidered with tiny vines and acorns, and has the kind of dramatic sleeves that can knock over candlesticks and inspire poetry. Millicent climbs back in as you tighten the bodice, settling inside the left sleeve with the determined squirm of someone burrowing into a croissant. And now your arm is officially full. You make your way down the spiral stairs. The stone is cold, and the walls are close enough that your sleeve occasionally brushes damp plaster, which Millicent does not appreciate. She sneezes with all the fury of a damp aristocrat. In the corridor you pass 2 maids carrying baskets of linen and gossip. She says the thing sleeps in her hair, one whispers. No, my cousin says it bathes in wine, the other replies. You pretend not to hear. Millicent, insulted by the very suggestion, huffs dramatically and shifts further into your armpit. The solar is already buzzing. Lady Cecily's in the corner, struggling to reattach a ribbon to Joffrey's harness. He looks wildly uninterested in participating. You swear he's smiling. You take your usual spot, set out your embroidery, and begin threading your needle. Today, you're working on a tapestry square for the bishop's new guest room, depicting St. Gertrude warding off rats. It's ironic, really. Gertrude is the patron saint of cats and travellers, and occasionally you suspect ferret girls. You begin to stitch. Millicent, sensing you'll be immobile for a while, begins cleaning her tail inside your sleeve. It tickles. You hold back a sneeze. Lady Cecily leans over. Did you hear about the friar? You nod. The one who thinks our companions are moral distractions. He says yours looks possessed. Possessed by what? Clean paws and a sense of vengeance. Cecily snorts. Historians still argue whether church figures truly believed ferrets were demonic, or if they just didn't like women appearing competent while a carnivorous sock nested in their sleeves. Some records mention exorcisms, others just describe animal companions that stared with alarming awareness, which, to be fair, is how Millicent looks at meat pies. But demonic, please. She can't even find her tail half the time. You keep stitching. Halfway through your St. Gertrude, Millicent starts twitching. You feel it first, a little tremor near your elbow, then a jerk, then the full-body thrash of a creature who's just remembered she left a breadcrumb stash behind the bookshelf and must get to it now. You hold her back gently. We'll go later. She bites your sleeve in protest, not through it, just enough to make a point. The point being, you are not the boss of her. Outside, it starts to rain. Light at first, soft enough to be romantic, dramatic enough to ruin everyone's plans. Lady Cecily sighs. So much for our walk. Joffrey is chewing a shoe strap. Millicent is now sulking under your upper arm. You keep sewing. You're stitching a rat now. Long tail, twitchy nose, little embroidered panic face. It's oddly satisfying. You feel a quiet pride as the form takes shape under your fingers. And then you feel it. The unmistakable rumble of Millicent deciding that this rat must die. She explodes from your sleeve like a furry cannonball, hits the embroidery frame and sends threads, beads, and 3 innocent spools flying across the room. The solar descends into chaos. Joffrey joins in. He doesn't know why. Lady Cecily drops a cushion. A maid screams. Millicent grabs the embroidery rat, realizes it's flat, and looks personally betrayed. You gather her up, muttering apologies, while she clings to your arm like a damp rag full of rage. Everyone stares. The friar enters. He takes one look at Millicent, lets out a long, exhausted sigh, and says, "I'll be in the chapel." He leaves. You breathe. Then Lady Cecily starts to laugh. It spreads, quietly, then louder, until even the maid with the flying spool incident joins in. You cradle Millicent against your chest. "Next time," you whisper, "you can embroider the rats yourself." She yawns. The storm rolls in properly by midday, slamming the shutters like an angry stagehand and turning the castle's corridors into echo chambers of dripping cloaks and annoyed horses. Millicent, still recovering from the scandal of the embroidery rat, is curled in a damp bundle near your collarbone, nose twitching with each distant crack of thunder. You're posted at the high window above the main hall, sipping something warm and questionably wine-based, wrapped in your second favourite cloak. The first one still smells faintly of beetroot pie and regret after last week's feast. Below, the hall is bustling with rain refugees, wet guards, grumbling squires, and one bard trying to make a harp sound romantic while dodging leaking ceiling tiles. No one seems to mind that you've gone full ferret lady in a tower. It's a mood, one that comes with a side of honey biscuits and vague disdain for small talk. Millicent perks up suddenly. You follow her gaze, and sure enough, the falconer has entered with his latest rescue, a twitchy kestrel in a leather hood and a personality problem. The bird screeches. Millicent growls, which sounds like someone dragging a comb through wool. The two lock eyes. You whisper, "Not today," and tuck her deeper into your cloak. She sulks. You understand. The rain always makes things feel stranger. Time bends in the damp, stretches out the seconds. You think about how many hours you've passed with her just curled against your arm, breathing slow, like the world's least dignified heating implement. Historians still argue whether women in your position, noble but not royal, wealthy but not powerful, had meaningful ways to shape their environment. But what they forget is how much of life happens in moments like this. A warm drink, a quiet room, a tiny creature trusting you not to let her fall. You do not take it lightly. Later you wander into the library hoping for distraction. The librarian eyes Millicent suspiciously, but says nothing, mostly because the last time he did, she stole a bookmark and deposited it into the lectern's inkwell. You find an old bestiary, leather-bound, crinkly, and likely older than your uncle's jokes. You open to a page midway and find it. A weasel-like creature illustrated in gold and brown with red eyes and a rather generous tail. The caption in Latin reads something like, "This beast doth hunt the serpent and sleepeth in warm places, often the cloaks of witches." Millicent sneezes. You take that as agreement. The margins are full of doodles. Tiny monks, annoyed foxes, a drawing of a woman with suspiciously puffy sleeves. It's like finding an old friend's notebook scribbles. You trace one of the drawings lightly with your finger. The woman in the image has a knowing smile. Her sleeve bulges slightly. The ferret inside has a crown. It feels oddly accurate. Millicent sniffs the page once and licks it. You shut the book before she chews on a first edition. Outside, thunder rolls again. Someone drops a goblet downstairs. A dog barks at nothing. The day stretches on like the hem of an unfinished gown. You find a corner nook and curl into it. Millicent tucked close, your cloak bundled like a nest. There's something soothing about the wind howling just beyond the stone walls, so long as it stays out there. You remember hearing that some noblewomen trained their ferrets to respond to bells, that they'd scamper to attention at the sound of a handbell, ready to perform tricks or simply appear at their lady's foot like a furry ghost of good fortune. You tried it once. Millicent ignored the bell, knocked over your inkpot and fell asleep in your writing box. You've never rung it again. There's talk of the bishop coming to dinner again tonight. You briefly consider bathing Millicent for the occasion, then remember the last time she was submerged in lavender water and declared war on towels. Instead, you brush her gently with your comb. She tolerates it for 20 seconds, then attempts to eat the bristles. You'll settle for feral but clean. Dinner arrives with thunder and fanfare. The hall glows with torchlight, puddles, and enough damp wool to clothe a herd of suspicious sheep. Millicent stays tucked close as you descend the stairs. At the long table, the bishop pretends not to see her. She pretends not to exist. You both know better. Lady Cecily sits beside you, Joffrey draped around her neck like a morally ambiguous scarf. Across the table, a knight begins reciting a poem to no one in particular. It's not good. He rhymes glory with sore knee. You think about correcting him. You don't. Millicent nibbles a sliver of roasted duck from your palm, and in that tiny, quiet exchange, hidden under velvet and candlelight, you find something like peace. The morning after, the storm always feels like waking up inside someone else's laundry. Everything's damp, slightly crumpled, and smells faintly of onions and stone. Millicent refuses to emerge from your sleeve, possibly because your room has developed a miniature indoor puddle near the window. You use your slipper to poke at it, then sigh. It's not moving. It's part of the architecture now. Downstairs, the staff is grumbling. Something about wet rushes and a squirrel that snuck inside during the night and is now refusing to leave the pantry. You stay upstairs for as long as is socially acceptable. Eventually, a maid knocks and informs you that the bishop has asked for a quiet consultation. This translates roughly to, someone needs to scold you about sleeve mammals. Millicent naturally begins snoring. You tuck her firmly inside, tie your sash, and make your way toward the bishop's chamber like someone being summoned for minor treason. The corridor is colder than usual. You wrap your cloak tighter, wondering how many people in this very hall had once carried their own tiny rebellions hidden in fabric folds. Not just ferrets, but notes, secrets, keys, small pies. You'd hide a pie if you could. The bishop greets you with a solemn expression and a mug of something that smells suspiciously like watered-down mead. You sit. He clears his throat. "Young lady," he begins, which is already a bad sign. "There have been murmurings." You nod politely. Millicent shifts in your sleeve. You gently pat the fabric to calm her. He continues. "Some have observed that your companion..." He hesitates, then adds with barely concealed distaste, "The weasel has disrupted the sanctity of prayer, study, and at least one embroidery circle." You raise a brow. "Disrupted," you say. "Or improved?" He blinks. Historians still argue whether ferret-keeping women were seen as eccentric or subversive. You suspect the answer is yes. Eccentric and subversive. You've yet to meet a ferret who wasn't both. "She climbed onto the altar during Vespers," he says flatly. You pretend to be shocked. "Oh no, did she light any candles?" "She sat inside the collection plate." "That's practically a donation." He sighs deeply, rubs his temples and mutters something about St. Augustine never having to deal with this. You offer your most demure smile. Millicent lets out a long yawn that sounds exactly like someone who doesn't believe in clerical authority. Eventually, the bishop relents. "Just keep her confined." "Of course," you say. "She rarely leaves my arm." You rise, bow slightly, and leave before he can summon scripture. Back in your chambers, you release Millicent onto your writing desk. She immediately knocks over your ink. Twice. You mop it up with a rag, then unroll a fresh sheet of parchment. Today's task: write a letter to your cousin in Normandy. You've decided he needs to hear about the Great Collection Plate incident. You dip your quill. Millicent bites the feather. You retrieve another. This is your life now. As you write, you remember a detail from a manuscript you once read in the library, a tiny sketch of a noblewoman with a ferret curled on her shoulder. The note beside it read, "Her joy, her thief, her cloak's warm ghost." You think about that a lot, because while most people see a pest or a pet, you see a pattern, a legacy. Sleeve ferrets weren't just decoration or deterrent. They were tiny, unspoken symbols of agency, of choosing something odd and inconvenient because it made you feel a little more yourself in a world that expects sameness. You seal the letter with wax. Millicent tries to lick it. "Stop that." She doesn't. Later you wander through the cloisters, your boots echoing against the stone. Rain drips from the arches, and birds have begun their afternoon arguments in the rafters. You pass a window and catch your reflection, hood up, cloak wrapped, sleeve gently squirming. You look like trouble. Good. You pause at the chapel. Inside, Lady Cecily is lighting a candle. Joffrey is asleep around her neck like a morally complex scarf. You sit beside her, quietly. The candlelight flickers over the worn wood and faded frescoes. Cecily whispers, "They're thinking of banning us from feast nights." You nod. "On account of the chewing?" She shrugs. "Or the burrowing. Apparently one of the squires had his pocket breached." You both try not to laugh. It doesn't work. Millicent sticks her head out, eyes glowing in the candlelight. You whisper, "Don't set anything on fire." She blinks once, then curls back up. It's quiet and peaceful and a little bit chaotic, exactly as it should be. The sun returns the next morning, reluctantly and with no real enthusiasm, like someone late to a dinner they didn't want to attend. But it brings with it a crisp breeze and the smell of wet stone baking dry in the light, which is just pleasant enough to convince you that today might not be terrible. Millicent, of course, disagrees. She's gone full blanket burrito and refuses to emerge from the folds of your dressing gown. You carry her down to breakfast like a very warm, slightly growly loaf of bread. The great hall is unusually lively. Someone's playing a lute. Someone else is failing to play a flute. The bishop is absent, which may explain the good mood. Lady Cecily waves you over. "We're going hunting," she says brightly, as if this is a normal sentence to hear before tea. "Rabbit, ferret-assisted." You blink. Voluntarily. "It's tradition, or at least that's what my uncle says." Historians still argue whether medieval noblewomen genuinely participated in hunting with ferrets, or merely claimed credit for it while sipping wine nearby. Some manuscripts show women in full hunting gear. Others simply depict a ferret disappearing into a bush while a lady holds a parasol and looks bored. You, for one, are curious to find out. Millicent is less convinced. Out in the fields, the ground is soft and the sky a kind of hopeful blue with enough clouds to look dramatic in a tapestry. Cecily leads the way, Joffrey slinking along beside her like a tiny assassin. Millicent peers out of your sleeve, takes one look at the tall grass, and retreats like a disapproving duchess. The gamekeeper, a man with more beard than chin, explains the process. You send the ferret into a burrow, he grunts. Rabbit bolts out the other side. You net it. Do the ferrets ever not come back? You ask. He scratches his head. Sometimes. You look down at Millicent. She looks up at you like, try me. Nevertheless, the attempt is made. Cecily kneels beside a promising mound. Joffrey is launched gently into the hole like a noodle-shaped torpedo. There's a moment of silence, then rustling, then nothing. You all wait, and wait. Eventually, Cecily shrugs. He's probably redecorating. You don't blame him, it's probably quieter down there. Millicent is up next. You crouch beside a second burrow and carefully coax her toward it. She sniffs the entrance, sneezes, and gives you a look that says, if I wanted to crawl around in tunnels, I'd be a mole. Still, she goes in. There's rustling, scratching, a tiny yip. Then a rabbit bolts out the other side like its tail is on fire. The gamekeeper shouts. Someone fumbles the net. The rabbit escapes. Millicent does not. You wait. The wind picks up slightly, rustling your cloak and sending a few dry leaves tumbling past. You're just about to consider sending in a rescue team or snacks when she reappears, covered in dirt, triumphant, and dragging a piece of someone's long-lost glove. You scoop her up, brush her off, and whisper, "You glorious disaster." She licks your cheek. Back at the castle, you and Cecily retire to the kitchens, where the cook has decided that rabbit-themed means carrots in everything. Millicent is fed a sliver of duck as compensation for being mildly inconvenienced. The rest of the day passes in soft sunlight and slow hours. You retreat to the library, Millicent snoozing like a tiny bag of mischief beside your elbow. You leaf through an old travelogue, some knight's memoir of the Holy Land, complete with dramatic flourishes and slightly suspicious accounts of dragon sightings. In the margins, someone has scrawled, "He cried when his horse got a splinter." You smile. It's comforting somehow to know that even centuries ago someone was making snide little notes in the margins of important books. Millicent shifts slightly, pressing her nose to your sleeve. You remember when she was small enough to fit entirely inside your boot. She once hid there for hours and terrified a maid into thinking the devil had possessed your footwear. She hasn't grown that much, but her presence feels bigger now, essential, a part of your routine, your rhythm, your identity. Historians might debate the practical role of sleeve ferrets, but they miss the quiet parts, the companionship, the warmth, the comic relief when someone tries to lecture you and your ferret yawns directly at them. Millicent snores. You turn the page. Outside, the wind has picked up again. Not a storm, just a soft bluster, enough to make the shutters rattle and the ivy shiver. You wonder how many women over how many centuries have sat just like this, curled in window seats, tiny beasts in their sleeves, books open, waiting for nothing in particular, not for news, not for permission, just for the next quiet moment. You pull your cloak tighter and let the day go on without you for a while. You wake to scratching, not ominous scratching, not supernatural, just the dull, methodical sound of something small and determined trying to open a box that's absolutely not meant for opening. Millicent has discovered your jewellery chest again. You crack one eye open. She's already halfway inside it, nose deep in the velvet pouch that contains precisely nothing of interest to anyone not obsessed with tassels. You sigh. It's far too early for moral conversations about boundaries. Sliding out of bed, you scoop her up gently, earning a ferret-sized squeak of protest. She flops over in your palm like a satin ribbon with opinions. You tuck her into your sleeve before she can register what's happening. She huffs. Outside your window, the sky is that pale medieval grey that could mean sunrise or impending siege. You tug on your gown, lace your boots, and begin the day. Downstairs, the castle is humming. Not literally, though given the state of the plumbing, that wouldn't be surprising, but in that quiet, efficient way that means something is about to happen. Trunks being hauled, horses snorting, kitchens radiating the scent of burnt honey and meat pies in distress. You spot Cecily in the corridor. "Leaving?" you ask. She nods, adjusting her cloak. Joffrey is curled in her hood like a morally questionable neck pillow. "My aunt in Coventry insists she's dying of boredom. I'm going to save her." With a ferret? Always. You hug her goodbye. The kind of hug that says, "We've survived 3 feast scandals, and that one time our pets desecrated a relic together." Millicent pokes her head out and sneezes on Cecily's collar. "A parting gift," Cecily says solemnly. "Farewell." And with that, she's gone. You watch her disappear into the misty courtyard, a slim silhouette with a squirming lump in her hood and no real intention of arriving on time. You'll miss her. Back inside, the atmosphere feels quieter, roomier, less chaotic, which is not always a good thing. You retreat to the solar and curl into your favourite seat, the one by the tall window that overlooks the kitchen garden. It's mostly cabbages right now, with one extremely overachieving pumpkin that seems to be threatening the herbs. Millicent settles in your lap. You offer her a dried fig. She licks it twice, then decides it's a footrest. Across the room, 2 maids are talking in low tones. Something about a nobleman arriving this week. Someone important, maybe dangerous. Certainly someone who doesn't approve of ferret fashion. You look down at Millicent. She looks up at you like, "Let him try." The morning passes slowly. You stitch for a while, nothing fancy, just a little flower motif for a handkerchief that no one will ever see. It's calming, hypnotic almost. Thread through fabric, over and under, like thoughts threading through a half-forgotten dream. You remember your grandmother's voice, explaining how sleeves used to be detachable, that women used to have 2 or 3 pairs they'd swap in and out depending on the season, or the mood, or the mischief of the animal hiding inside. Historians still argue about the fashion choices of the 14th century, whether sleeves were a sign of wealth or just a practical way to smuggle food. But one thing is clear, detachable sleeves gave you options, which in a world that often offers women so few, matters more than it seems. You hear footsteps, someone clearing their throat. You look up to see the steward, a man built like a cupboard with all the emotional range of one, standing in the doorway. He looks nervous. "Message for you, milady," he mumbles, holding out a sealed note. You take it. The wax is unfamiliar. The symbol, a stylized falcon clutching a quill. You break the seal. The note is short, neat, and vaguely threatening in the way all formal medieval correspondence is. It says a visiting knight will arrive within the week. He's known for his discipline, his loyalty, and his unfortunate opinions about unladylike habits. You fold the note quietly. Millicent yawns. You whisper, "Looks like we'll have to behave." She immediately bites the hem of your sleeve and begins dragging it toward the window. Or not. You spend the rest of the afternoon preparing mentally for his arrival. You practice walking slowly enough to seem regal, quickly enough to prevent sleeve hijinks, and always at angles that minimize visible squirming. You try hiding Millicent in your belt pouch. She escapes. You try luring her with honey. She eats it, then climbs the curtains. Eventually, you give up and let her run laps around the dressing table while you brush your hair. There's a sense of something shifting in the castle. Not just guests or gossip, but that particular flavour of tension that means someone's going to say something rude in Latin before dinner. You sit on the windowsill with Millicent curled in your elbow. Outside, the light is soft. The world feels momentarily still, and you whisper, not to anyone in particular, "We're not going anywhere." Millicent nibbles your sleeve. You think she agrees. The night arrives exactly as predicted, with too many horses, not enough smiles, and the personality of a wet stone. His armour shines too brightly, his voice carries too far, and he has the disapproving eyebrows of someone who probably believes chess is an act of rebellion if the queen moves too boldly. You meet him in the great hall during supper, flanked by attendants who all look vaguely seasick despite being on land. He bows low, introduces himself as Sir Eldrick of Stonebridge, and compliments the roast goose before immediately launching into a 10-minute monologue about the moral decay of courtly life. You nod politely while hiding a sliver of turnip under your napkin for Millicent. She accepts it with mild disdain, as though you've insulted her palate, but she's too hungry to make a scene. Sir Eldrick continues. He mentions discipline 3 times in a single sentence. He refers to wild habits that need correcting. He glances, briefly, sharply, at your sleeve. You raise your goblet. "Tell me, Sir Eldrick," you say sweetly, "have you ever known the comfort of a warm ferret on a cold winter's night?" His jaw tightens. You sip delicately. Historians still argue whether visiting nights influenced household customs or simply annoyed everyone for a few weeks before riding off into obscurity. You're currently rooting for the latter. Later, back in your chambers, you peel off your outer gown and collapse into the window seat. Millicent climbs onto your shoulder and immediately begins gnawing the drawstring of your chemise. You let her. It's less painful than dinner. Outside, the moon rises full and pale. The halls echo with the distant clatter of someone trying to put away too many goblets with not enough hands. You imagine Sir Eldrick pacing his chamber, reciting self-written sermons to his boots. You whisper to Millicent. He probably polishes his armour more than he talks to actual people. She snorts, which you take as confirmation. The next morning, Sir Eldrick invites you to walk the gardens with him. You decline. He insists. You relent. But only after Millicent has been thoroughly brushed, perfumed, regretfully, and tucked into your sleeve like an overly judgmental secret. The garden walk is as awkward as expected. He talks about self-denial, proper posture, the virtues of single-colour wardrobes. You make vague noises of interest while pretending to inspect a rosebush. Millicent pokes her nose out, sees him, retreats instantly. Smart girl. He finally asks, "And what of that creature? Does she serve any useful purpose?" You stop walking, smile sweetly. "She reminds me not to take anything too seriously, including myself." He blinks. You add, "She also bit a duke once. Very useful." He does not laugh. You feel a tiny nose nuzzle your wrist in solidarity. The walk ends early. That evening, you find yourself in the library again. It's become a sanctuary, a place where scrolls are silent, books don't judge, and ink stains are a sign of accomplishment, not carelessness. Millicent curls beside you, belly up, tiny paws twitching as she dreams. You pull out your journal and begin writing. Not a letter, not a record, just your own thoughts, meandering like the ivy outside the tower window. You write about sleeves, not just yours or Cecily's, or the ones depicted in elaborate tapestries, but the sleeves of women long gone, fabric filled not with etiquette, but with rebellion, with teeth, with fur, with laughter. Sleeves that hid tiny lives, and maybe big ones too. Historians will study the names, the lineages, the politics, but not the sleeves, not what they carried, not the warmth they cradled. You close your journal with a soft thud and rest your cheek against the wooden table. Millicent stirs and crawls up your arm like a sleepy scarf. You murmur, "Don't ever let anyone shrink your world." She flops across your neck like she owns it. Maybe she does. Maybe that's the point. By the time the weekend arrives, the castle has reached peak awkwardness. Sir Eldrick remains for reasons that no one quite understands. His sermons are longer. His metaphors are more tortured. Yesterday, He compared moral fortitude to a straight-backed fence post. You weren't entirely sure what that meant, but Millicent fell asleep during it, so it can't have been urgent. Today's breakfast is a strained affair. A loaf of bread as dense as the night's conversation sits untouched. Someone has tried to cheer things up with early pears, but they taste like if a rock and an apple had a disappointing child. You excuse yourself early and disappear into the herb garden, Millicent tucked under your cloak like a medieval conspiracy. The garden is peaceful, bees hum, mint leaves sparkle with dew. Somewhere nearby, a chicken makes a personal decision. You settle beside the rosemary and exhale. Millicent slithers out onto your lap and immediately begins trying to unbutton your boot. No, you say gently. That's how we lost the spoon. She ignores you. You reach into your pouch and retrieve your little scroll of proverbs, common sayings, odd idioms, and the occasional bit of wisdom you've collected over time. One of your favorites reads, "A woman with sleeves is never truly alone." You add a new one beneath it, "Nor is she unarmed." Millicent promptly falls asleep on the scroll. Typical. As the sun climbs higher, you hear the unmistakable sound of Eldrick's very righteous footsteps approaching. You stay where you are. The mint will protect you, but he finds you anyway. He clears his throat. You look up slowly, as though startled by his presence. You're not, and offer a vague smile. "Lady," he says gravely, "I must speak with you about the creature." "Millicent," you correct. He sighs. "She is becoming a distraction." "She is a distraction," you say. "That's half the point." He doesn't understand. He launches into a slow, ponderous tirade about virtue, order, and how women ought to appear more solemn and less inventive. You zone out somewhere around decorum. Historians still argue whether women like you, educated, observant, and not particularly interested in embroidery contests, had any real influence in court life. But influence, you've noticed, doesn't always come with titles. Sometimes it just comes with presence, with being impossible to ignore, with tiny paws skittering across tables at just the wrong moment. Millicent wakes, stretches, and climbs up your arm. You brace yourself for mischief. Instead, she perches gracefully on your shoulder and begins grooming her tail. Sir Eldrick looks horrified. You smile like someone who just won a very small, very satisfying war. "She has good manners," you say lightly. "She is an animal," he says, "unfit for..." But he never finishes, because at that exact moment, Millicent does a tiny, perfectly timed sneeze directly into his goblet. You pretend not to notice. He stares at the cup. You stand, brushing off your skirts. "Well, that seems like a message from the heavens. Good day, sir," and you walk away. Later, you hear that Sir Eldrick has requested to leave the castle early. Something about needing to commune with stricter men. You wish him a bumpy journey. That night, the great hall is filled with laughter again. People joke without fear of being corrected. The bard actually sings a song about a noblewoman and her sleeve ferret. It's not historically accurate, but it's catchy. You hum it under your breath as you help the cook dry her pans. Millicent sits on the counter, licking butter from a spoon. You tell her she's a menace. She headbutts your wrist affectionately. You wonder if women centuries from now will know these stories. Not just the ones in books, but the ones that never made it past the hearth. The ones shared in kitchens and corners and under moonlight, when propriety is asleep and truth comes out in whispers. Sleeves carried more than warmth. They carried resistance, joy, curiosity, and occasionally a rodent with questionable ethics. You kiss the top of Millicent's head and whisper, "Let's make sure we're remembered." She burps, a fitting answer. The morning arrives soft and golden, the kind that makes even the castle's drafty corridors feel like they've been gently toasted. Birds are scandalously chipper. The kitchen smells like spiced honey cakes. Somewhere, someone is playing a lute with more enthusiasm than skill. You're not in a hurry to get dressed. Millicent has commandeered your best woolen shawl and is currently impersonating a bread roll. You let her. She deserves weekends too. Today is market day, which means you'll be making your once-weekly appearance at the village down the hill. ostensibly to buy soap and fabric, but really to eavesdrop on gossip and sneak candied almonds while pretending to inspect embroidery thread. You gather your coin pouch, your outer cloak, and your sleeve ferret transport system, which is just your largest pair of sleeves with reinforced hems. Millicent hops in without fuss. You suspect she remembers the almond stand. The path to the village winds through fields and hedgerows, dotted with cows who have no sense of personal space. Millicent peeks out occasionally to judge them. "Don't stare," you whisper. "It's rude." She sneezes directly onto your braid. You forgive her. The village is already bustling. Chickens underfoot. Market stalls creaking. A sheep bleats like it's just heard bad news. You make your way through the crowd, exchanging nods with vendors and dodging several suspicious cabbages. At the cloth merchant's tent, a new arrival, a merchant woman from the southern coast, leans over and says, "Is that what I think it is in your sleeve?" You smile. "Depends what you think it is." She grins back. "I had one once. Name was Balthazar. Stole my landlord's wig." You nod solemnly. "A noble act." She laughs and offers you a discount on indigo wool. Across the square, children chase each other with sticks. Someone's selling pickled plums. A nun argues with a pig. You take it all in, the colours, the smells, the chaos, and feel something settle in your chest. Not peace exactly, but presence. You belong here, not because of your title or your dresses or how nicely you can recite prayers, but because you're known, in a strange, sideways way, as the one with the ferret, the one whose sleeves have opinions. Historians still argue whether animals in medieval villages were truly part of the social fabric or merely tolerated background noise. But walk through any market with a half-asleep weasel on your arm and see how many strangers smile at you. Back at the almond stand, Millicent is alert. She recognizes the crinkling of the paper. You buy a bag and pretend not to notice as she sneakily fishes one out through a sleeve hole you swear wasn't there yesterday. "Don't eat the whole thing," you whisper. "We're sharing." She does not agree. You pause at the apothecary's booth, mostly because he has a jar labelled "Courage in Powdered Form." You're not sure what's in it, but it smells like mint and misplaced confidence. "I already carry mine," you say quietly, glancing at your sleeve. The apothecary doesn't get it. That's fine. On the way home, the wind picks up. The trees sway like they're trying to share secrets. Millicent naps soundly, full of almonds and civic engagement. You climb the final hill slowly. No rush. You're thinking about how odd it is that you've become part of this rhythm. That you, a girl once scolded for letting a ferret eat a bishop's quill pen, now get nods of respect from merchants and smuggled recipes from bakers. You reach the castle just as the sun starts dipping. The guard on duty opens the gate and grins. "Welcome home, milady. How's the menace?" Millicent snorts from your sleeve. "Belligerent," you reply fondly. Later, after supper, you return to your room and unwrap the indigo wool. Millicent immediately sits on it like a living stamp of approval. You light a candle, pull out your journal, begin a new entry. Today, Millicent attended market. She engaged in light theft and received 3 compliments. One man fainted slightly. Success. You pause, tap your quill, and add, "I think we're becoming a story." Because it's true. The kind passed on in whispers. The kind embroidered into borders. The kind written not just with ink, but with paw prints and laughter and soft rustling sleeves. And almonds, obviously. Always almonds. The next few days are quiet, but not in the dangerous prelude to a curse sort of way. Just the soft hum of daily life settling into its grooves, like parchment curling at the edges after years of peace. Even the castle breathes easier. The staff are smiling more. The cook hums again. Someone strung ribbon through the banister, and you're choosing to believe it was festive rather than a very strange trap. You find yourself lingering longer in the library, not for research, just to sit near the windows, to listen to the rustle of pages and the occasional thump of Millicent falling off the table mid-nap. She has discovered a deep love for sunbeams. You once caught her sprawled across a theological manuscript, using the margins of a sermon to clean her ears. The irony was not lost on either of you. Today, you pull a slim book from the high shelf, bound in cracked leather, pages soft with age. It's a bestiary. You flip through sketches of lions with human faces, fish that resemble priests, and birds that cry when they see the moon. The explanations are equally strange and completely confident. Ferrets, one entry reads, are noble in purpose, but chaotic in temperament. You nod. That tracks. Historians still argue whether medieval bestiaries were meant to be taken literally or served as allegories for the soul's struggles. Either way, they're full of quiet little confessions about how people saw the world, messy, magical, and often furry. Millicent gnaws the corner of the page and sneezes. You close the book. In the afternoon, a letter arrives. It's from Cecily, delivered by a pigeon with impressive opinions about your windowsill. You untie the note and unfold it. Her writing is as chaotic as ever. She reports from Coventry. Aunt's still pretending to die. Joffrey stole a hat. We're banned from one church but welcomed in 3 inns. Life is balance. You laugh out loud. Millicent startles, flails, and falls off the cushion. She recovers with the dignity of a queen whose throne betrayed her. You pen a reply. All's well. No one has been excommunicated recently. Millicent continues her reign of passive defiance. We're considering a flag. As evening comes, you decide to visit the chapel, not for prayer, not really, just for the acoustics and the echo of your own footsteps in the stone. There's something soothing about the way the air feels inside, thick with incense, dust, and time. You sit on the pew. Millicent curls beside you, one paw twitching. You stare up at the stained glass, colours dimmed by twilight. There's a saint with a lion at his feet, and you wonder what it would look like if someone ever depicted you and Millicent, probably you looking tired and her mid-crime. You whisper, I don't want to be famous. I just want to be remembered. She twitches in her sleep. You think that means you already are. As you rise to leave, you notice something carved into the bench. Ancient graffiti, scratched deep with a nail or a knife tip. It reads, she wore wildness in her sleeves. You run your fingers over it and smile. On the way back to your room, the stars are out. Millicent sits atop your head like a fluffy comet. You wonder how many women across the centuries carried little creatures like this into their stories, not to tame them, but to keep something untamed alive in themselves. There's an old proverb the nursemaids use to whisper, keep a spark in your sleeve, child. One day, you'll need it. You whisper it now. Millicent purrs. The spark is warm, still here, still yours. You wake to rain. Not a gentle, poetic mist, but the kind of solid, wet assault that makes the castle roof sound like it's being pelted with uncooked barley. Millicent, tucked in the crook of your neck, gives a grumble that roughly translates to, no. You agree. You both stay in bed longer than usual, listening to the droplets drum the glass, the wind howl through the chimney, and the one window shutter that never learned how to behave bang once, twice, then give up. Eventually, duty wins over comfort. You pad barefoot to the hearth, light a reluctant fire, and wrap yourself in your thickest shawl. Millicent emerges reluctantly, fur fluffed like she's challenging the weather to a duel. Breakfast is porridge, soggy, lukewarm, absolutely fine. You share a spoonful with Millicent. She licks it once, then makes eye contact like you've personally offended 7 generations of her family. By mid-morning, the castle has gone quiet. Rain muffles sound, dulls movement. Even the chickens seem less committed to chaos. You take the opportunity to explore the attics. These aren't attics in the modern sense. They're sprawling, drafty, mostly forgotten chambers where furniture goes to retire and records go to hide. You light a stubby candle, bring a basket of snacks, and make a day of it. Millicent rides in your hood. She pretends it's a personal yacht. The air smells of dust, dried herbs, and decisions made 100 years too late. You poke through old trunks, gowns embroidered with faded gold, gloves missing their pairs, a letter addressed to a Lady Agatha, apologizing for something scandalous and never specifying what. You find a wooden box with a broken latch. Inside, bones, tiny, clean, delicate, and a note. Here lies Tuppence, the fiercest sleeve ferret to ever bless this miserable castle. May she haunt every pious boot that ever scolded her. You sit down very quietly. Millicent climbs onto your shoulder. You whisper, "You're not the first." She licks your nose. You tuck the box back where you found it, but not before tying a bit of your ribbon around it. Just a marker, just so someone else knows. Historians still argue whether women's pets in the Middle Ages were true companions or status symbols. But you've held rebellion in your sleeve. You've shared porridge with defiance. You've mourned a ferret you've never met. Tuppence lives on. The rain continues. By afternoon, your fingers are ink-stained, your boots are dusty, and your heart feels oddly full, like you've stepped into a secret corridor of history, the one with no portraits, but lots of paw prints. You find a map of the region, hand-drawn, patched with guesses, and spend an hour tracing rivers you've never seen, imagining villages you'll never visit. Millicent sprawls on the parchment. You think she wants to colonize the West. Evening falls. You descend back into the main hall, smelling like the past and looking like someone who's seen a ghost and invited it to tea. Dinner is stew. Thick, comforting, suspiciously beat-heavy. The fire crackles. Someone plays a slow tune on a lute that's mostly in tune. You eat slowly, listening to the hum of the room, the soft chatter, the clink of spoons. Millicent dozes in your lap. Tomorrow the weather may clear. You may ride out, or host a guest, or fix the shutter that's now flapping like it's trying to start a revolution. But tonight is for remembering Tuppence, and everything she stood for, which, judging by the note, included chaos, comfort, and a low tolerance for authority. You raise a spoonful of stew. "To old friends," you murmur. Millicent doesn't stir, but the wind outside shifts slightly, like someone just nodded. The next day, the rain has stopped, but the sky is still pouting about it. The air hangs heavy and wet, like a badly rinsed bedsheet. Everything smells vaguely of moss and medieval disappointment. You take your breakfast outside anyway. The courtyard is slick with puddles. The fountain has become a sort of duck spa. Millicent eyes it with interest. You remind her, gently, that she's terrible at swimming and that last time didn't end well for the monk's sandals. She pretends not to remember. You sit on the stone bench by the rosemary bush, warmed slightly by the returning sun. The stone is still damp, but you don't mind. There's something refreshing about being surrounded by puddles and not being the cause of them for once. Today feels like a day for letters. You fetch your writing kit, your best sealing wax, and that ridiculous feather quill you only use when you're in a dramatic mood trademark. Millicent curls up in your empty basket and supervises. You write to Cecily again, of course. This time with updates about the market, the mysterious graffiti in the chapel, and a detailed reenactment of Millicent's almond heist. You end with, "Tuppence says hello from the afterlife. She's probably chewing on St. Jerome." You seal it with green wax and a bit of mint tucked under the flap. Then, impulsively, you begin a second letter, not to anyone in particular. You just write, about the weather, about the ferret, about the odd comfort of quiet rebellions, the kind tucked into sleeves, or hidden in locked drawers, or whispered behind herb barrels at dusk. You don't sign it. You just tuck it under a loose floorboard in the library, along with 3 almonds and a ribbon. Maybe one day, someone will find it. Maybe not. That's the thing about legacy. You don't always get to watch it happen. Historians still argue whether women's daily lives in the Middle Ages had any lasting impact on the grand narrative of kings and wars. But here's what they forget. Sometimes the loudest stories are built out of small, persistent echoes, ferret-shaped ones. You spend the afternoon in the tower, organizing the chaos that is your wardrobe. Apparently, You own 11 pairs of sleeves. Just the sleeves. Not attached to anything. You start sorting them into categories. Ceremonial but useless. Useful but mildly cursed. Ferret compatible. Millicent tries on 3 before she decides none are flattering. Later you find an old sash embroidered with the castle's motto, Virtues in silentio, strength in silence. You laugh. Not really our brand, you tell her. She bites a hole in the corner. Evening comes with a little celebration, a name day for the steward's youngest. The hall fills with laughter, bread, and musicians who play like they've only recently discovered rhythm. You and Millicent sit on the edge of it all, sipping watered wine and observing. She receives 3 pats and 1 suspicious glare. You receive compliments on your cloak. You tell exactly 1 person that the fur on the trim is alive. They don't believe you. Millicent winks. As the music swells, you find yourself oddly emotional, not because of any grand speech or moving moment, but simply because of how ordinary it all is, how real. This isn't the kind of life they write songs about, but maybe it's the kind they should. You slip away before the last song, back to your room, to the comfort of parchment and pause. You light a candle, unwrap a dried plum, and whisper into the flickering light. We're not done yet, are we? Millicent stretches, yawns, and headbutts your ankle. Number not even close. You begin the next day with a list. It's maintenance day, a tradition in the loosest possible sense, where you attempt to maintain the illusion that parts of the castle aren't falling apart, rotting through, or plotting against you. It starts with the brass. There's an entire hallway of sconces that haven't seen a polish since the last solar eclipse. You arm yourself with a rag, a tin of paste that smells like regret and lemons, and Millicent, who has appointed herself supervisor of everything, especially things that smell weird. She inspects each sconce before you polish it. You assume she's checking for ghosts. You're halfway through when she vanishes. 1 second she's perched on your shoulder, the next, a faint skitter-plop scramble down the hallway. You call after her, but you know better. She's found something. You finish 1 more sconce, then track her down to the storage closet under the stairs, the one that contains exactly 1 bucket, 5 cobwebs, and a previously unknown mold colony currently colonizing your old riding boots. She's sitting proudly on top of them. They were leather once, you murmur. She nods, as if to say, now they're art. You chuck the boots out the window. The mold deserves freedom. Historians still argue whether medieval castles were marvels of engineering or just glorified cold boxes with plumbing anxiety. Yours leans toward the latter. Next on your list, the tapestries. You climb the ladder in the hall, swatting at dust with a broom that looks more decorative than useful. Millicent watches from the ground like a tiny foreman. You tug too hard. The top corner of the tapestry detaches. 300 years of solemn embroidery slouches to the floor with a noise like a sigh. You just sit beside it. Eventually, Millicent climbs onto your lap and licks your hand. She's never been a fan of that tapestry anyway. Too many horses, not enough rodents. You roll it up, prop it in the corner, and declare that space an experimental gallery of fabric-based entropy. The steward disagrees. You ignore him. Afternoon arrives, and with it, a surprising sense of momentum. You decide to tackle your closet. It contains 7 mismatched gloves, 2 hats shaped like accidents, a gown that might be haunted, and a small box labeled Button Collection, Do Not Touch. You touch it. Millicent tries on a glove. Gets stuck. You rescue her and declare the glove temporarily retired. You find a pair of boots you forgot you owned, still sturdy, still warm. They smell faintly of rosemary and decisions. You put them by the door. You find a jar of rose water from 2 summers ago. You dab a little on your sleeves. Millicent sneezes dramatically. The day ends the way maintenance days always do, not with triumph, but with manageable chaos. You haven't fixed the castle, but it's no longer actively insulting you. You settle by the fire with a bowl of something stew-adjacent. Millicent curls in the crook of your elbow, smelling faintly of polish and whatever lives in that closet. You raise your spoon. To survival, you say. To sleeves, she replies, by headbutting the bowl. You remember something your tutor once said, long ago. Order is just the illusion that nothing is currently on fire. You think you've achieved that. Mostly. Night comes gently, the sort of night that doesn't storm or brood. It simply arrives, quiet as breath, soft as the moment before a candle flickers out. You're not tired yet, just slow. The castle feels hollow in a good way, like a seashell. You can hear the echo of your own thoughts inside it, faint and filtered. You walk the halls barefoot. Millicent trots behind, tail high, nose twitching. Every few steps, she pauses dramatically at a wall or door frame, as though expecting a secret passage to reveal itself. You indulge her. It's a game, after all. One you're both always playing. Down in the east wing, the windows face the forest. You pause at one and look out, just trees and moonlight and the faint outline of the old tower where they used to store regrets or maybe laundry. Hard to say which. You think about the women who lived here before you, the ones no one remembers. Not queens or saints, just residents of sleeves and stories. Maybe they had their own Millicents. Maybe they wrote letters and stashed them in crumbling corners. Maybe their laughter still clings to the beams, waiting to be heard again. You press your palm to the cool glass. No ghosts tonight. Just you, and a ferret, and a castle that's learning how to be quiet. Back in your room, you light a final candle, the small one, the one with the scent of cloves and rain. Millicent leaps onto the bed like she owns it. She does. You curl beside her, blanket around your shoulders, journal in your lap. You write one last note. We didn't set the world on fire, but we lit a few candles, and sometimes that's enough. You close the book, blow out the light, and settle in. The stone sighs. The night deepens. The sleeve, as always, is warm. So now, as you lie there, blankets tucked up to your chin, the room quiet except for the soft hum of night. Let it all drift away. Let the candle smoke dissolve into the shadows. Let the weight of your thoughts sink into the mattress until you feel like a leaf resting gently on a still pond. Every breath is slower now, longer, softer. Imagine the castle again. Empty halls, closed doors, windows letting in starlight like silver thread. And in one quiet room, a girl curled up in bed. Ferret curled at her side, her sleeves still rumpled from the day's small adventures. She sleeps without worry now because she knows something most people don't, that magic doesn't always arrive with trumpets or fireworks. Sometimes it arrives in whiskers and fabric, in the comfort of odd routines, in the quiet defiance of living well when no one's watching. You carry that magic with you, even now, so let your breathing slow, let your shoulders release. There is nothing left to fix tonight, no dragons to chase, no markets to wander, only sleep, and a soft, furry weight tucked in the space between dreaming and memory. You are safe, you are seen, and somewhere, in some version of the past or the present, or the dream you've only just begun, a ferret sighs in your sleeve and nudges you gently toward rest. Good night.